Our Capitol Hill reporter Kevin Fry is tracking the fallout in Congress, and we have the two perfect guests for this conversation. Senior editor at the Cook Political Report, David Wasserman, and the director of the University of Virginia Center for Politics, Larry Sabato. So, Kevin, I'll start with you. What kind of reaction are you seeing there in Washington? How does this potentially shift the midterm conversation?
I mean, look, it's falling essentially as you'd expect. Many Republicans are now kind of admitting openly, candidly, some commentators as well. OK, well, what was the what was the outcome of this? Did we actually achieve our goal when we kicked this off about 9 months ago in Texas? If anything, Democrats have fought this to a wash. There is still an outstanding question, I should say, of what happens in Florida. They're set to meet for a special session next week. But Democrats, meanwhile, are frankly celebrating this. If anything, they may have come out slightly ahead, and perhaps most notably is Congressman Hakeem Jeffries. He stands to be, of course, the next Speaker of the House next year should Democrats win the midterms and win control of the House of Representatives. He's saying in a statement overnight, in part, if I can pull it up here, that essentially they're going to respond with maximum warfare everywhere all the time, and saying that the Democrats defeated the gerrymandering scheme in Virginia tonight. He also offered a warning there for Governor DeSantis in Florida, saying that they will crush any attempt at gerrymandering there. Now, as you mentioned, the vote in Virginia, relatively tight, especially compared to the governor's race last year and even the presidential race 2 years back. But here is just a taste of what we heard yesterday, including from some Democrats who, quite frankly, were a bit on the fence about this because of the idea of, OK, we don't like gerrymandering, but is this worth pulling the lever in support of perhaps an extreme gerrymander in Virginia? Take a listen.
It is clear that instead of our elected leaders trying to provide what the people want, they have used tactics like this to suppress the vote. And this is one way to close that gap a little bit.
I don't think the politicians should try to engineer an outcome, no matter how, good the cause is.
You can make the argument that you have to do everything correctly and by the book. But if, the people you're, playing against aren't fighting fair, I think there's a point at which you have to, do the same thing.
So playing off of what I just mentioned there, that second individual you heard from is a Democrat. She said she supported a constitutional amendment in Virginia back in 2020 to essentially make an independent body to draw these maps. And so she's like, on principle, I can't back this resolution to re-gerrymander the maps after I supported doing away with gerrymandering in the state. As I mentioned, there's still lingering questions about Florida, but Democrats very much coming out of this, especially Jeffries, rather revved up about the belief that they have fought Republicans to a draw here.
David, what are your top takeaways for both parties?
Well, Republicans' dreams that they could protect their House majority by basically instructing every red state to eliminate Democratic seats in advance of the midterms was dashed a long time ago. But the big difference between what we saw in Texas versus and what we were about to see in Florida versus California and Virginia, Republicans had already gerrymandered Texas and Florida in 2022. So there are fewer seats to squeeze out of there that do so in a way that guarantees Republican pickups, whereas they didn't bargain for California and Virginia setting aside constitutional anti-gerrymandering provisions to pass new maps. And in those places, we had a commission-drawn map in California and a court-ordered map in Virginia that were fairly neutral. And so there was more upside for Democrats, and that explains why Democrats are coming out ahead. And I learned in Larry Sabato's class in college about the Virginia way. Virginia has a history of pretty fair elections and governance. This is a very unnatural thing for Virginia to have done, but it proves how dug in Democrats are to counter what they're seeing from the White House.
Now, let's get at that. Here's what Virginia Governor Abigail Spanberger said on Morning Joe today about this successful outcome for her party.
Our goal should be that when we no longer have a reckless president who just believes he's entitled to congressional seats, that we will ensure that Virginia leads the way in going back to our redistricting commission, as the amendment that we passed yesterday calls on us to do. We recognize the stakes of this moment. We recognize the seriousness of what is occurring in other states, whether it's North Carolina or Texas or Missouri. We will be responsive, but we are also responsive to the people.
Larry, the Democratic Party has tried to uphold political norms and guardrails as a counterweight to Trump and the MAGA movement taking a flamethrower at them. So are you surprised Democrats not only fought fire with fire in purple Virginia, but pulled it off?
Well, it's kind of bluish purple. It's every year it seems to get a little more Democratic. The people who are comparing this redistricting vote to last November's candidate elections for governor and other statewide offices are really off base. I personally know a fair number of Democrats who voted no on the amendment because they don't think two wrongs make a right. But obviously a majority voted the other way. It's frankly a miracle that they could get it passed. As Dave mentioned, this is not the Virginia way. This is not the way it used to be done. And really some of that still carries over. People don't like tactics like this. But Donald Trump has changed the rules. This is about Trump. And Republicans, at least privately, are confronting this. They realize this was a stupid strategy all across the country. It's not going to yield them very much at all, as we'll see in the elections in November. And it's made them enemies they didn't have to have. Not to mention, it's not good for the country.
More of the political wins in the new polling are revealing that Donald Trump is becoming less and less popular. A new AP poll has him with 33% approval, a full 2/3 of Americans disapproving. But the Democratic Party has also consistently struggled in polling for years. So, David, for voters to approve maps in two states that are explicitly meant to boost Democrats, what does that say about this moment? We lost your audio, David. Double check your mute just in case.
Sorry. Democrats view this as existential, much as they did in 2018. And for Democrats to have passed this by only 3 points, it does suggest that there were plenty of voters with reservations about it. After all, Abigail Spanberger had carried the state by 15 points. And there was a high level of Republican outrage against what Democrats were seeking to do. But the bottom line is that it's going to propel 4 additional Democratic seats out of the Commonwealth. And in Florida, Governor DeSantis, he might not be able to persuade Republicans to go completely maximalist there, because if you try and eliminate 5 of the remaining 8 Democratic seats in that state, it could displace too many Democratic voters. And so Democrats are overwhelming favorites for House control at this moment.
Larry, Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries has gotten some flack from the Democratic base for not doing enough to oppose President Trump. But Punchbowl lays out how he was actually instrumental in this Virginia redistricting win, writing, Jeffries oversaw this effort from start to finish, setting up the referendum campaign, hiring staff, and coordinating action on the ground. There was a lot of reluctance among Virginia Democrats over this gamble. That forced Jeffries to convince the delegation and the feuding chambers in the state legislature to get on board. What does this say, Larry, about his approach and tactics as he is potentially months away from becoming Speaker?
Yes, Jeffries was critical in this effort in Virginia. I know that personally. He put the pieces back together when they appeared to be coming apart, although key legislators like Speaker of the House in Virginia, Don Scott, played a major role too. Look, the point is simply this. It's happening. It makes a difference for Jeffries and the Democratic Party. How can anyone say now that Democrats aren't fighting back and using the tools available to them? This was a very bold, controversial strategy on Jeffries' part. It certainly was in Virginia, and probably there will continue to be reverberations from this. But the Democrats fought hard, and they went to the edge of the abyss here, and they managed to pull it off and get it done. And so they're feeling good and bad today. They're sorry they had to use these tactics. A lot of them are, but they felt they had to do it because, Dave, it's Donald Trump with Democrats that is the existential threat.
Well, and I think it's important to emphasize that what we saw in Texas was the Republican legislature just ramrodding these new maps through. They didn't go to the voters. Here in Virginia, as we saw in California as well, it was the voters who agreed to making this redistricting map change. Kevin, what would Democrats do with a House majority? Do they have a clear agenda yet?
Well, and one thing on it to build off of what you were just saying is when I pressed Jeffries on how Democrats maintain the moral high ground on the gerrymandering piece, that is kind of how he's explained it, is basically saying, well, we did this differently than in the Republican states. We were responding. We were letting the voters decide. We did not just have the legislature do this by fiat. In terms of their agenda, look, I asked Jeffries about this just last week in terms of, OK, so are we going to get a step-by-step principled plan? Are we going to see bills rolled out about what exactly you plan on prioritizing? We know their agenda boils down to, if you've been listening to anything from Democratic messaging over the last couple of months, fighting for affordability, reining in costs, and there's a piece of that is also fighting corruption that they see within the Trump White House and therefore oversight of the Trump administration writ large. We don't have those specific bills laid out quite yet. And obviously, if they are operating in a only Democrats running the House sort of Washington, or even if Democrats squeak out a win in the Senate as well, they're going to be running up against the Trump White House. So they're not going to get this broad agenda through. But Jeffries suggested in the coming weeks we could start to get kind of more of a spelled out policy proposal of what Democrats will actually be doing should they get the majority in the House.